Welcome back to Johnny Bones Garage. Today we're here again with this 2012 Ford Escape and we are doing the front brake caliper. Got a jack under here already to support using the pinch weld right underneath here. Jack it up and we're going to put a jack stand right up underneath here to support the car. Now the first thing I'm going to do before I get this tire off the ground is I'm going to loosen some of these lug nuts. Air tools help. Alright, after it's jacked up and supported with the jack stand, we're going to go ahead and remove all of the lug nuts and remove the tire. There we go. Alright, the next thing is really to get this bracket off. I'm using this pair of channel locks to kind of just hold it into place while I pry with the flathead screwdriver here. And it should eventually pop off. This is probably the best way to pop that off there. So this bracket basically holds the inner caliper to the outer caliper bracket, which are two separate pieces. So the next part for removing the caliper is to remove these two dust caps here and here. That's what they look like right there. You can pry those off with a flathead screwdriver and it should pop right off. In order to get this caliper off, we have to remove these two slide pins here. I'm using a socket Allen key here, which is a 7mm hex Allen socket. It should go right here, and we'll loosen these. Alright, now we're going to go ahead and remove these slide pins. You'll want to clean these up and re-grease these before reinstalling. Now we should be able to lift that caliper right off of there. And it looks like my brake pads are in pretty good shape here. I was really replacing this because the caliper was locking up. But I'm going to keep these brake pads for now. This inner one has a clip on it that locks itself into the piston there. Next thing we're going to do, I got this breaker bar here. This is an 18mm socket on the end. I'm using an adapter because I have a 3/8 inch breaker bar and the socket is a 1/2 inch, so I'm using this adapter here. We're going to go ahead and break these two bolts loose on this bracket here. When you're doing a brake job, you really want to support this brake caliper in some way. I'm just using a coat hanger and supporting it by wrapping it up over the spring on the strut. You really want to do this so you don't damage the inside of this brake line. And now we can finish removing the brake caliper bracket. There you go, got the old bracket off. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take this brake rotor off and clean it up a little bit before reinstalling. There is some surface rust there. I'm going to use some brake clean and try to scrub some of that rust off of there. Alright, we're out here cleaning the brake rotor. Got most of that rust off of the front here. Clean that off using the drill and a wire wheel and some brake clean there. You don't want to use this wire wheel on the braking surface of this rotor. It could damage it. And we're going to try to get some of this rust off the back as well. Got that all clean. We're going to go ahead and put this rotor back on. First thing we're going to do though is going to spray a little bit of brake clean on here to make sure that braking surface is clean and slip this back on. You want to use a couple of lug nuts just to hold this rotor in place. We're going to hit the outside of the rotor with some brake clean again. Shout out to CRC products, by the way. We're going to get this caliper bracket back on here. These bracket bolts should be torqued to 129 foot-pounds. To torque those down, I'm going to use this foot-pounds torque wrench here. That's good. Good. Okay, now we're going to try to get this brake caliper off of here. In order to get this thing off, you do have to loosen the brake line on the back first and physically twist the brake caliper off of the line. And there we go, got the old one off. Here's the new one. We're going to get the thread started with the brake line and twist on this new caliper. Alright, and for now we're just going to lay this caliper on here, and we are going to tighten the brake line with a 14mm wrench for this one. You can also do a finalized tightening once the caliper is locked into the bracket. Now we're going to take this caliper, just set this up on top for now, and get ready to install the brake pads here. First, I'm going to clean these brake pads off with a little bit of that brake clean. Now you're going to want to grease these brake pads where they're going to make contact with the caliper. So I'm going to grease this one here on the back side where it's going to make contact with that outer part of the caliper right here. And you're going to want to grease these little hook areas where the caliper is going to sit on the bracket there. This is the pad for the inside where it goes against the piston. So we're going to grease around here where it's going to sit against that piston. Next, we're going to get these brake pads into the caliper. Make sure on this inside one that you snap it in and it locks into place. Now that we got the caliper on and the brake pads in and the brake line attached, now we're going to reinstall the slide pins here and here into the black boots that sit into this caliper. Again, don't forget to clean and re-grease these slide pins before reinstalling on the caliper. We're going to go ahead and get those started. Alright, now we're going to torque down these two slide pins that are in the rubber sleeves back here that hold this caliper part to the caliper bracket here. And we're going to torque those slide pins to 18 foot-pounds. Alright, we got those slide pins torqued down now. Next thing we need to do is just put the dust caps back over top of them. The next part is really trying to get this spring bracket thing in here. It holds the inner caliper to the outer bracket. I'm going to put these lips on here first and try to pull this area up into those holes there. Alright, well I got this bracket clip finally back on. It was a little interesting to do, but I first put these two tabs on first here and grabbed this and just pulled straight away from it, and the other two sat right into place, right into these two holes right here. Hey, so that's really it for the 2012 Ford Escape brake caliper replacement. The only two things really left to do are put your wheel on, put the lug nuts on, torque to about 100 foot-pounds torque, and then bleed the brakes. A couple of things on bleeding the brakes. First, find your brake fluid reservoir underneath the hood. Open the cap, make sure that thing stays full of brake fluid the whole time while you're bleeding the brakes. Keep it full after every time you bleed them. One person in the vehicle pumping the brakes, one person at the brake caliper working the bleeder valve screw. You'll want to sit inside, pump the brakes, hold down, person at the caliper, open up the bleeder valve. I use a tube like this on the bleeder valve, one end to the bleeder valve, and then wherever you want this to drain. Open it up while they're pressing on the brakes, and then you can see the fluid come out of the tube, and you can see if there's any bubbles in that line a whole lot easier with a clear tube. So do that a few times until you get all of the air out of it, and that's really it for the brake caliper replacement. You can look up separate videos also to see how to do this brake bleeding process. Anyways, thank you for watching. Catch me next time on Johnny Bones Garage. If I can do it, you can do it.